She'd been mopping that gun shop's own parking lot for 2 years, and nobody had ever once looked at her twice. That night she walked in still wearing the uniform, and the clerk told her, in front of 6 other customers, that people who scrubbed toilets for a living had no business touching a $5,000 rifle. She didn't say a word back. She just asked for a target set at 500 yards. 5 shots later, the tape measure in the range officer's hand was shaking harder than her own hands ever had. But nobody in that shop knew the real reason she'd walked in that night wasn't the rifle at all. Somewhere in a government office 3 states away, a clock had started running on a file with her name on it. A file marked dead for 6 years, and she had exactly 71 hours left to prove she was still alive. The gray Corolla with the busted taillight pulled into the lot at 6:40 on a Tuesday, and Odalys Reyes sat behind the wheel for 11 seconds before turning off the engine. Habit, not nerves. Scan the lot. Count the cars. Note the exits. She got out still wearing the gray polo stitched evergreen facility services, the 6 to 2 office shift, no time to go home before the diner job at 9. She'd come to Bill's Outdoor Sporting Goods every Tuesday for 2 years, same 15 minutes of rental range time, paid for out of a coffee can of quarters. Nobody in that shop had ever asked her name. The bell chimed. Behind the counter, Derek Voss, 26, 3 years on the job, a gun rack tattoo he liked to show off, saw the gray polo and did the same small, involuntary thing his mouth always did. "Lane time, please," Odalys said. 15 minutes. Derek didn't move for the register. On the counter sat an unlatched case, a Barrett, $5,000, in for appraisal while the owner made a call. "With that uniform on?" Derek said, loud enough that 2 men by the scope wall turned, and a father walking his son past the handgun case slowed down. "I got no problem selling you range time. That's fine, but don't be getting ideas about that." He nodded at the Barrett. People who spend their days scrubbing toilets don't exactly inspire confidence around real equipment. The shop went quiet the way a room goes quiet when everyone decides, without saying so, to keep listening. "I don't need to touch the Barrett," Odalys said, something in her settling cold and precise. "I'd like a lane, and a target set at 500 yards. Derek laughed. Bill's ran a 100-yard indoor bay, and out back, behind a chain-link gate almost nobody used, an outdoor range that stretched to 600. 500. With what rifle? Whatever you'll rent me that reaches it." A side door opened. Tom Halverson, 50s, gray mustache, range officer badge, 11 years running this range, stepped out to see what had stopped the whole floor cold. "She wants 500, Tom," Derek said, in her cleaning uniform. Tom looked at her a long moment. The stance, feet apart, hands loose but not restless, eyes already mapping the shop without her head moving. And something prickled at the back of his neck he couldn't have explained. "Got a Remington 700 in .308. Reaches 500 if the wind's kind." He named the price. Odalys set crumpled bills on the counter, counted and recounted a dozen times over. Derek rang it up too fast. Out at the range, Tom set up the rifle himself, checking the bolt with a small fumble under her watching gaze. "Scopes zeroed for 200. No dope sheet for this load. You're eyeballing your hold past that." "I understand." By now half the shop had followed them out. Derek, arms crossed, waiting to be proven right. The scope wall man, the father, an old man in flannel who'd stopped pretending to browse. Odalys settled behind the rifle, adjusted the bipod, found her cheek weld, went still in a way that made Tom's stomach turn over. Not nerves, not confidence, just the stillness of someone for whom the mechanics of a shot had stopped requiring thought long ago. She read the limp wind flags for 4 seconds, made a correction smaller than a heartbeat, and fired. "Center mass," Tom said through the spotting scope. "High. Left." She corrected. Fired again. Tighter. 2 inches from the first. By the 4th shot, Derek had stopped leaning on the gate. By the 5th, the whole line had gone silent in the specific, electric way of watching something nobody fully understands. Tom walked the 500 yards himself, the way he always did for serious groups, and came back with the target rolled under his arm, hands shaking as he unrolled it against a truck hood. 5 holes, all within a group smaller than a fist, dead center. "That's a group I've seen maybe 4 times in 11 years, Tom said, voice catching. With an unfamiliar rifle and a scope zeroed wrong for the range. "Ma'am, where did you learn to shoot like that?" A long time ago, Odalys said, clearing the rifle. Somewhere I don't really talk about. She reached for her jacket on the fence rail, and her phone, old, cracked screen, ringer always loud, began buzzing. An out-of-state number, 3 area codes away. Her jaw tightened. She answered, Reyes. A pause. Her whole body went still in a different way now. Not concentration, but the stillness of someone absorbing terrible news and refusing to show it. Say that again. How long? Another pause. Tom, Derek, and the small crowd watched the way you watch someone get news in a hospital hallway. 71 hours. Odalys said, mostly to herself, closing her eyes for exactly 1 second. I understand. I'm coming. She ended the call, pulled on her jacket over the gray polo, and turned back to the crowd, her face already rearranged into something composed and 3 steps ahead. Thank you for the lane time, she told Tom. Ma'am, wait. He still held the rolled target like it was fragile. Who taught you to shoot like that? What was that call? Something moved behind her eyes. Almost a smile, except sadder. Someone died, she said. 6 years ago. According to the government, anyway. She walked out through the gate, and none of them had the first idea what to do with what they'd just watched. The drive took 4 hours, and Odalys made it without stopping except for gas. The man who'd called was Grady Boyce, retired now. The closest thing she'd ever had to a handler who treated her like a person instead of an asset. In short, clipped sentences he laid it out. 6 years ago, a Black Hawk carrying 4 members of a joint task force, a unit that existed on no public roster, under an authority most of Congress only partially knew about, went down in mountainous terrain during a botched extraction. 3 bodies recovered. 1 wasn't. Per protocol for personnel whose service record officially didn't exist, the task force filed her as deceased 6 weeks later, once the search window closed and the terrain made recovery unfeasible. Except she hadn't died. She'd walked out of those mountains 11 days later, 1 arm broken, half-starved, and by the time she re-established contact, the casualty paperwork had already been filed, and because the program was too black to simply issue a correction, the fix got buried in a classification review that dragged on for 2 years, then indefinitely, as the people with clearance to approve it retired, transferred, or lost the file in a reorganization. She'd spent 6 years as a woman the government had quietly decided no longer existed. No pension, no VA benefits, no identity that connected cleanly to who she'd been. She told herself, every year, that eventually someone would fix it. Now someone finally had. A new oversight committee reviewing legacy black programs had flagged her file as an anomaly. A casualty with no verified remains, no coroner's signature, just an administrative declaration. They'd given the program 72 hours to produce remains or produce the person. If neither happened, her death would be formally, permanently ratified, sealed, unappealable, and any future attempt to claim her own identity would trigger a fraud investigation, because on paper, she'd be a dead woman impersonating herself. The only man who could walk her into that review and vouch for her was retired 2-star General Marcus Feld, the officer who'd commanded the task force, signed her death declaration himself, and had spent 6 years believing he'd gotten one of his people killed. There was a problem. Feld wasn't answering calls, not Grady's, not the committee's. He'd retired 8 months ago and gone dark at a lake house 3 hours outside the review city, ever since a car accident had killed his wife 4 months earlier. He blames himself for you, Grady said. Now his wife's gone too. I need you at that lake house getting him talking inside 30 hours, because it's 4 hours there, 4 hours back, and that math leaves no margin. I'll get him, Odalys said. I owe him a conversation anyway. The lake house sat at the end of an unplowed gravel road, a mud-spattered pickup gathering leaves against its tires out front. Odalys knocked twice before the door opened. General Marcus Feld, gray-bearded now, flannel robe over sweatpants, staring at her for 4 full seconds like a man looking at a ghost, because as far as his own signature told him, that's exactly what he was. You're dead, he said, flat, almost gentle. I walked out of those mountains 11 days after the crash. You know that. Somebody buried the correction. I signed that declaration myself, Feld said. I stood in front of your ex-husband and told him you didn't make it. 6 years living with that. His eyes, red-rimmed, unfocused, drifted past her toward the empty road. Elaine died 4 months ago. Car went off the ridge in the ice. I was 200 yards up the driveway walking the dog. Couldn't get there in time to matter. 2 people I couldn't save, both times told afterward I'd done everything right. Odalys stepped into the doorway until he had to step back. I need 67 hours. There's a review board 4 hours from here. And if you don't walk in with me and confirm who I am, the file that already says I'm dead becomes permanent. Not ever fixable. Not by anyone. I don't have a badge that gets me past the front desk anymore. No clearance. No reputation that survives a committee already treating this whole task force like an embarrassment to Barry. I've spent 8 months in this house barely getting the mail, Reyes. I'm not the man who could walk into a review board and make anyone believe a word out of my mouth. You're the only man who signed his name to my death, Odalys said. That signature still means something to that board, whether you believe it does or not. It's the only thing in this entire process that can't be argued with, because you were there, and you know exactly what you did and didn't see. You have a signature, a memory, and 4 years of command authority no committee erases just by you retiring. You have 67 hours to decide whether you'd rather spend the rest of your life having gotten someone killed or having actually saved someone, for once, when it mattered. Feld's jaw worked. For a moment, Odalys thought she'd pushed too far. Then his eyes drifted back to the pickup gathering leaves, and something shifted. Give me 20 minutes to find a shirt that doesn't smell like a distillery, he said. They made it back with 11 hours to spare. Until 40 minutes from the city, a black SUV that had been tailing them at a careful distance for 30 miles closed the gap and forced the Corolla onto the shoulder. Odalys had clocked it 8 minutes earlier. 2 men got out, plain clothes, moving with the economy of people who'd had tactical training and hadn't entirely lost it. The taller one leaned into the driver's window, hands visible, ignoring Odalys entirely. General Feld, there's a car waiting to take you back to the lake house. This isn't a conversation you need to be part of. Who sent you? Feld said, old command presence hardening in his voice. Someone who'd prefer this stays a closed file. Someone who's managed the fallout of a program you used to run, sir, and doesn't need it reopened 40 hours before a board meeting that's supposed to close it for good. And her. Feld nodded at Odalys. The man glanced at her, the gray polo, the assumption she wasn't a factor worth accounting for, and made his mistake. She's not on my instructions. Then she comes with me. Odalys moved before Feld had finished registering it. Door open, out of the car, closing the distance before the man could react. She didn't strike him. She closed her hand around his wrist, redirected his own balance with a small rotation of her hip, and had him pinned against the SUV, arm bent at an angle that made further movement unwise, before his partner had covered half the distance to help. Tell me who sent you, she said, low and level, or I dislocate this and you explain that to whoever's paying you instead. The second man froze, hand halfway to his jacket, doing the math on what he'd just watched happen in under 2 seconds. Easy, Feld said, stepping out, hands raised. Not to Odalys, to the second man. Voss, the pinned man breathed. Colonel Aldrich Voss. He's been sitting on your reclassification for 2 years, General. He's not letting a review board undo 6 years of paperwork he personally signed. Odalys released him. He slid down against the door, cradling his wrist. Of course it's Voss, Feld said bitterly. My deputy the last 2 years I ran the program. Reads a bureaucratic loophole like other men read poetry. He filed the original declaration. If your status gets corrected, it doesn't just embarrass the program. It puts his signature on a 6-year error a review board exists to find and punish. Odalys looked at the 2 men, now all clear of her, recalibrating in real time. Get back in your car. Tell Colonel Voss the general's still coming. Tell him I'm coming with him. And tell him he's got exactly the wrong idea about how quiet I'm willing to be. They reached the city with 6 hours to spare, and the 6 hours evaporated fast. Grady met them at an all-night diner 3 blocks from the review board's building, face drawn tight. Voss got there first. He's been with the board chair an hour. He's going to argue the file should close exactly as scheduled, that reopening a 6-year-old declaration on the eve of a consolidation review creates more institutional risk than it resolves. That even with you standing there breathing, General, the paperwork trail is what the board has to certify, and identity verification takes months this review doesn't have. That's insane, Feld said. She's sitting right here. He's betting the board takes the clean, fast option. What we need is something the board recognizes immediately, in the room, that can't be faked and can't be argued with. Feld went quiet, turning something over. Colonel Priya Anand. She oversaw our program before Voss took over as my deputy, debriefed every task force member personally, multiple times, verbal only, precisely so certain details never got written down. If Odalys can answer questions only the real person would know, in front of Anand, that's verification no lab result could beat. Is she still on the board? She's the chair, Feld said. Which means Voss has been talking to the one person hardest to fool for the last hour, and I have no idea what he's told her. The review board's building sat downtown, 11 stories of glass. Security stopped Odalys at the second checkpoint. Her ID, a facility badge, and a license under a name no database recognized. Until Feld argued, with the authority of a man who'd once outranked everyone in the building, that she was coming upstairs regardless. They reached the 8th floor with 40 minutes on the clock. Colonel Aldrich Voss stood near the head of the table, trim, precise, a man built for reading loopholes, his face arranging into careful concern at the sight of them. General, I certainly wasn't expecting company. You sent 2 men to run me off a highway 40 minutes outside this city, Feld said. Let's not pretend surprise. Colonel Priya Anand, silver-haired at the head of the table, looked between them with the flat attention of someone who'd sat through a great many contentious meetings. Colonel Voss has spent the last hour arguing this woman cannot be verified within the time remaining. I'd like to hear from her directly before I decide whether I agree. Odalys stepped forward. Colonel Anand, you debriefed me personally 3 times over 2 years. The first time, off the record, you asked if I'd ever considered getting out. I said no. I didn't know what I'd be if I wasn't doing this. You told me that was the wrong answer. Anand's expression didn't move, but something in the room's temperature did. The second time, Odalys said, was after an operation neither of us is permitted to name, in a country that officially had no American personnel present that year. You asked me one question that never made it into any written record, because you told me yourself it wasn't a question you wanted findable. What I'd done with the extra 30 seconds I'd taken before the shot that ended that operation. The after-action timeline showed a gap nobody could account for. Voss shifted, almost imperceptibly. I told you I'd used those 30 seconds confirming there was no one else in the room, Odalys said. That the briefing hadn't accounted for a second occupant, and I wasn't firing until I'd confirmed it myself, chain of command or not. You told me that answer was the only reason you recommended me for the assignment that put me on that Black Hawk 11 months later. The one Colonel Voss filed a casualty report on, based on a search window that closed before anyone bothered confirming there was no body to find. The room went silent. Anand turned to Voss. Colonel, is there anything in the written record of that second debrief, the one you'd have reviewed preparing your argument to this board, referencing a 30-second gap in an after-action timeline? No, Colonel, Voss said, jaw tight. That detail was never entered into the written record. Then the only 2 people who could describe it are standing in this room, and one of them is me. Anand turned to Odalys. For the record, full name, original service designation, and the date of the incident. Odalys gave both, clearly, without hesitation. Anand closed the folder, glanced at the 2 board members flanking her, and got 2 small, decisive nods. This board finds sufficient verification to reopen and correct the casualty declaration, effective immediately, Anand said. Colonel Voss, you'll prepare the corrected paperwork personally, by end of day, given your role in the original filing. Voss said nothing. His face had gone the gray of a man watching 6 years of quiet bureaucratic burial collapse in under 4 minutes. It was nearly 9 that night before Odalys stepped out onto the sidewalk, the paperwork already moving through channels that would, over the coming weeks, restore a pension, a service record, and a legal identity quietly erased for 6 years. Feld waited under a streetlight, older out here than he'd looked in the lake house doorway, but straighter somehow too. I owe you an apology I don't think I can ever finish giving, he said. You already gave it, Odalys said. You got in the car. What now? Back to the cleaning shift. She thought about the gray polo folded on the Corolla's passenger seat, the coffee can of quarters waiting at home. Eventually, There's a shop I still owe $15 in lane time. I never got to shoot the second half of my session. Feld almost smiled. The one with the kid who insulted your uniform. That's the one. Going back. Every Tuesday, Odalys said. Same as always. The following Tuesday, Tom Halverson was closing up when the bell chimed at 6:41, 1 minute later than usual. Odalys walked in wearing a plain gray t-shirt this time. No uniform, hair pulled back. Derek looked up from the counter. He'd been quieter all week. Since the Tuesday the whole shop watched her put 5 rounds through a fist-sized group at 500 yards, and then take a call that ended with someone dying 6 years ago, according to the government. He hadn't asked anyone what it meant. There was a version of that day he understood without needing it spelled out. The version where a woman he'd looked at for 2 years and never really seen had been carrying something heavier than the shop had bothered to imagine. He'd stopped making the face when the bell chimed now. Lane time, he asked, no edge left in his voice. Please. And the outdoor range, if it's open. 500 yards. Yeah, Derek said, already reaching for the log. Of course. Tom came out from the back, saw her at the counter, and allowed himself a genuine smile at a customer for the first time in 11 years. Same rifle as last week? If it's available. Most folks who put a group like that on paper don't come back the following week and pay for lane time like it was nothing, he said, reaching for the gate keys. Most folks, that's the kind of thing they'd want people to remember them for. Odalys counted crumpled bills onto the counter, a little cleaner this week, a little less worn. I'm not trying to be remembered for the shot. I just needed somewhere quiet to think, 15 minutes a week, before I had a reason to remind anyone I existed at all. Tom held the gate open. Out past the chain link, the evening light lay low and gold across the range, the orange flag at 600 yards hanging still in air with no wind at all. The kind of evening built for a clean shot, for anyone patient enough to wait for it. Odalys walked out to the bench, settled into the same stance she'd used 100 times before nobody was watching, and got back to the quiet, ordinary work of proving, one Tuesday at a time, exactly who she'd always been.